There's a war coming, and it's going to be a big war. It's going to be a world war. A lot of players are going to get pulled into it on both sides. It's going to be a nuclear war. It's going to be a war marked by cyber attacks and biological weapons, as well as conventional fighting with troops and tanks and planes. Satellites will be hacked or shot out of the sky, and there'll be a ton of stuff we've never seen. It's going to be a bad one, and it's going to happen soon. At the moment, all the talk is about China and Taiwan. China intends to reclaim Taiwan. Of course, by saying that, what it's really saying is that China is prepared to go to war with America if America doesn't get out of its way. And America is not going to get out of its way. Even though the US has adopted an official policy of strategic ambiguity, meaning that it's not saying if it would protect Taiwan or not, Taiwan is of high strategic significance to the United States. Not only do the people of Taiwan consider themselves a sovereign nation, not only are they the world's most advanced supplier of microchips through the company TSMC, they are also a key bastion. They are part of an island chain that is containing the Chinese military largely to the East and South China Seas and providing forward bases by which the US is projecting power into China. This island chain is called the First Island Chain. Taiwan is often referred to as the unsinkable aircraft carrier. America will almost certainly come to Taiwan's support if China attacks. Just briefly, in 1895, Japan took Taiwan from China and held it until the end of World War II, wherein it was returned to the Republic of China, who were engaged in a civil war. They lost and so set up permanent base in Taiwan. China is saying that it is going to reunite Taiwan under its One China policy and will bloody the heads of anyone who gets in its way. It's bigger than that though, as China's leader Xi Jinping also intends to return China to centre stage in the world. And considering that it is a communist country, the veiled threat is that it intends to flip the world to its system of autocratic rule. Can it do it? Well, the current pandemic has certainly conditioned the world to authoritarian control by governments. China knows that to take Taiwan, it must first cripple the US in the Pacific, much like Japan tried to do in World War II by attacking Pearl Harbor. The great fear that therefore looms before us at the moment is not the clash between China and Taiwan, but between China and the United States, two economic and military powerhouses facing off on either side of the Pacific Ocean. If it is able to successfully implement a strategy to knock the US back to the mainland, it will peel open Asia like an oyster shell. China has thousands of mobile missile launchers capable of taking out US bases, and has armed its ships with the so-called aircraft carrier killer missiles. This is a technology the US doesn't have and will be hard-pressed to defend against. Make no mistake, China is gearing up for a war with the US. The US also has support in the region from South Korea and Japan, both of whom have sizable militaries, and from its allies in Australia and Europe and the rest of Southeast Asia. Before we go any further, let's take a look at the size of the Pacific Ocean. It takes up half the Earth. China is on the west and the US on the east, neither of which is visible in this image. Pressing an attack into the homeland of the US will take time, as will coordinating a response to China if the US is pushed back to the mainland. In addition to the first island chain of Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines and Borneo, there is also a second island chain comprising the Bonin Islands of Japan, the Mariana Islands and the Carolina Islands. Guam, the largest US military base in the Western Pacific, is in the Mariana Island group. There is the third island chain, otherwise known as Hawaii, containing the military base of Pearl Harbor on the island of Honolulu. It will be extremely difficult for China to remove the US from all three island chains back to the mainland. It will require surprise, which can only be achieved through misdirection. This means the US will be reacting to China's first move, which is not a good position to be in when you consider the lethality of what is coming their way. Of course, the US also has ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, capable of hitting China from the US mainland, and China will be considering that. It has elaborate tunnels in its mountains and underground for just such a scenario. In the past decade, China, under the leadership of President Xi Jinping, has rapidly developed into a military superpower. There is a strong nationalistic drive within the country, whose people urge and support a reunification with Taiwan. In addressing Chinese strength, one island I would draw your attention to is the island of Hainan, which is a major Chinese naval base. It also has its nuclear submarine fleet stationed here, and with this base, it projects power into the South China Sea. America will need to counter this base if it is to be successful in disabling the Chinese Navy. Also in the South China Sea, projecting power, are the Paracel and Spratly Islands, which the Chinese have developed and militarized, or semi-militarized. There are also civilians living there. In this map, the outer rings show the extent to which Chinese fighter planes can fly and thus intimidate neighbouring countries. In other words, project power. It is in the South China Sea where the freedom of navigation exercises are taking part with the US Navy and its allies. This area could be an inadvertent flashpoint for the war, catching both sides off guard. It may seem like China has an impossible task on its hands in defeating the US and its allies, both locally and around the world. But that would be looking at it too superficially. China, you see, also has allies, and you can bet secret alliances are being, or have been, already drawn up between some, if not all of them. The first ally I will draw your attention to is North Korea, the rogue nation. North Korea, for years, has been developing nuclear technology and firing missiles over Japan to land in the Pacific Ocean, or drop forward into the Sea of Japan, and has been on a war footing with South Korea. North Korea hates deeply Japan and has ambitions of reclaiming South Korea. Note how it shares a common border with China to its north. Important if you want to move troops into the area from China, like what happened during the Korean War at the start of the 1950s. Also sharing a common border, only this time to its west, is Pakistan. Pakistan is a recipient of the Belt and Road Initiative, in which large highways, the equivalent of Hitler's Autobahn, have been or are being built. Hitler, of course, used the Autobahn to move ground troops and equipment rapidly between locations. Pakistan has a hatred for India. After the division of India on religious grounds in 1947, it was estimated up to 2 million people died and 10 to 20 million were displaced. There have been many clashes over the hastily drawn border, particularly around the area of Kashmir. India shares two borders with China and is thus a southern threat to China. There have been recent clashes on these borders, resulting in death. Both Pakistan and India are nuclearly armed countries. Also sharing a border with Pakistan is Iran. Iran, the rogue nation of the Middle East, who hates Israel and has sworn to wipe it off the face of the earth, who has been working on nuclear technology with the help of China and Russia, an ally of Russia, who doesn't get along with Saudi Arabia or the United States. Obama paid them over $1 billion in cash not to pursue the development of nuclear weaponry. Next is Russia. Russia is an ally of Iran and supplies it with weapons. Russia traditionally does not get along well with Europe. In 2014, it annexed Crimea from the Ukraine. When it turned off the supply of natural gas to Ukraine during the conflict, the rest of Europe downstream of it froze in their withering winter. Now Russia is building another pipeline into Europe. Europe currently is supplied through Turkey and Russia with oil and natural gas. Imagine if Russia was to suddenly turn it all off during the winter. Russia, of course, is heavily armed with nuclear missiles. Russia also shares a common border with China. Turkey is another key player that stands at the gateway of Asia and Europe, and like in World War I, could go either way. It has clashed with Russia and also has had periods of cooperation with it in the past. It wants to be a regional caretaker or power broker in the Middle East, but has struggled to do so. It has a rivalry with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. The Middle East was once under the control of the Ottoman Empire. All that is left of that today is Turkey. There have also been clashes with Greece over energy rights in the Eastern Mediterranean, which may tip it to China's side, using the conflict to seize power. So when we look at all these countries together, we see a very robust Eurasian Axis, capable of not only bloodying the nose of Europe, the US, and the rest of its allies, but also of potentially winning a world war. If you can stay with me for the next 4 minutes, I'll outline how I think it'll happen and when I think it'll happen. And if I can see this, you can bet they can see it too. Here is how I think it will go down with China. Firstly, I don't think they are going to try and salami slice their way to Taiwan by taking the tiny islands of Taiwan abutting the Chinese mainland, or try to strangle Taiwan through a blockade with its navy. or attack Taiwan and adopt a wait-and-see approach. I think this is much bigger than Taiwan, and all the signs are pointing to something much larger. It will be a sudden, unexpected and simultaneous strike at an exact time unknown, although I have some idea of when, and I'll tell you in a sec. It will be characterized by a massive, coordinated cyber attack on critical infrastructure, command and control systems, satellites, fiber optic cable network. It will be as if the internet never existed. Your cell phone will not work. That may be the first warning for many around the world that the war has started. Organising, coordinating forces within and between countries in response will therefore be extremely difficult. There will be a coordinated nuclear strike. They're playing for keeps. China will try and saturation bomb everything it can all at once. Bases, carriers, subs, anything it knows the location of. It may even launch a direct strike against the US mainland. North Korea will simultaneously launch against Japan and South Korea, effectively tying them up. Pakistan will launch against India, thus securing the southern border of China. China will march its 1 million strong infantry and tanks down the huge highways it has built into Pakistan and into Iran. Iran will fire on Israel and Saudi Arabia with nuclear weapons supplied to it by China or Russia or both. Yemen will launch against the Saudis. Egypt may join the fray against Israel. Turkey will also attack the Middle East. China will therefore rapidly secure the oil fields in the Middle East, something Hitler failed to do in World War II. It will then push into Europe and together with Russia will subdue Europe. The remaining focus then turns to the US mainland and smaller allies like Australia and New Zealand and Southeast Asia. Now, this is not some far off war I'm speculating about. It could happen in the next few years. The main sticking point in all of this is the amount of nuclear missiles that the United States possesses. To overcome this, China is going to need to get inside the US, either through hacking or bribing or both, and disable it, even if only temporarily, to buy it enough time to attack the mainland. It is estimated that within the next 5 years, China will have over 200 ICBMs capable of hitting the US mainland. For China, unless its hand is forced, my prediction is the attack will happen at or close to the next US election, which will be in winter of 2024. If you thought this last election was charged and disputed, wait until the next one. And depending on who is in power, the country may not respond effectively to China. Being winter, the oil and gas taps to Europe could be shut off by both Russia and Turkey. 4 years gives enough time for Putin to finish his Nord Stream 2 pipeline and thus exert even more control over this process. The cold before the storm. At this point, today, we are not at peace. We are in the preparatory stages of war. It's a waiting game. I think everyone on China's side is currently primed to act within a day's notice. All the focus will be on when the US military and the US nation itself is deemed most vulnerable. As cries of racism and discrimination permeate the military, it could be the US begin to demilitarize the island chains of their own free will in the coming years. When that happens, look out. In the next war, he who fires first will have a massive advantage. Thanks for making it through to the end of my spiel.